I don't have any more books, Carlotta said. Good morning, everyone. There's the bell. We're going to be getting underway. Carlotta was just asking about a book. I've given out all the books I have right now. We can have some more by next week. But if you don't have a book today, Luke chapter 7. We're going to be doing Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 17. And the Bible and that text will suffice as we follow through our lesson today. But we always like to start with a song, and Paul is here to lead a good song for us. So let's raise our voices and get our spirits lifted as we sing a song together. Thank you for singing your story so well this morning. So Luke chapter 7 is where we are. Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 17. Luke said in his introduction that he was putting together an orderly account of the life of Jesus. So we do want to recognize that what we have in the Gospel of Luke are not just a set of random stories, but there is a thread that's running through the book of Luke that holds things together, that gives a structure to the book of Luke. We've been mentioning it along the way over the last several Sundays. By the way, I appreciate that Barry Josephson taught last week. I was doing a Learning Levy, and last week was a teaching section from Jesus. It's Luke's shorter version of the sermon that we get in Matthew that we call the Sermon on the Mount. So we've had some teachings, and this morning we're going to have some actions that Jesus participates in, 2 miracles, some actions. But in the book of Luke chapter 4 at verse 18, Luke chapter 4 and verse 18, this was early in the Gospel of Luke. Birth stories are behind. The genealogy has already been listed. Jesus has endured successfully, victoriously, the temptation time in the wilderness, and then began his ministry. One of the early things that he did was to go to his hometown, the city of Nazareth, and when he was there, as he was invited to be the scroll reader, the scripture reader for that day, then he selected a passage from the book of Isaiah and said this. He read this. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, and set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So we have been mentioning that most weeks as we have been studying Luke and the things that come after that, because everything that we read, whether it is a miracle story like we have today, or if it is a teaching account like we had last week, or Jesus dealing with people in relationships and helping them along in some way, what Jesus is doing is fulfilling those words from the book of Isaiah. And we're supposed to connect that dot. We're supposed to get that is what Jesus is doing. He read in his hometown synagogue that day this passage about the anointed one, and that's the Christ. Christ is the word for anointed, or anointed is the word for Christ. So he is the Christ, and he has come to do these works of the Lord, and they are wonderful things, setting free those who are oppressed, bringing good news to the poor, bringing deliverance to those who might have disease or sickness. And today we're going to get a story, even the raising of the dead, when death has its grip on someone. Jesus is here to bring God's favor and deliver that person. So as Luke tells us these particular events in the life of Jesus, they are this fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 61. And then, so what we have today are two miracle stories that will get us about a third of the way through the Gospel of Luke in chapter 7. So that's where we need to have our Bibles open. The very first miracle we're going to read involves a centurion who requests of Jesus that Jesus heal the servant that he is concerned about. The centurion lives in the city of Capernaum. So we want to do a couple of introductory things about that. One is having this account of Jesus healing a servant at a centurion's request. I talked about this early on, you would have had to have been here early in our lessons to have heard this. But if the theory is correct, and I believe it is, that the books of Luke and Acts, Luke wrote both, Luke, Acts, when Luke put together by the Holy Spirit the two books, Luke and Acts, and addressed them to the most honorable Theophilus, then it becomes evident in some of the reading that one of the points that Luke is trying to get over to Theophilus and whoever might be in a situation like Theophilus and to all of us, that even though Jesus is the anointed one who has come to be a king, and he is King of the Jews, but not only King of the Jews, he's King of kings and Lord of lords. But as a point needs to be made to the world at that time, but Jesus as king and the kingdom of Jesus Christ is not a threat to the worldly kings, the earthly kings, and their earthly kingdoms and lands with their boundaries. Jesus would say later on, my kingdom is not of this world. There are kingdoms that are of this world. So And there was, as Christianity took hold, there was this fear among the powers that be that Jesus was, and the kingdom of Jesus was seditious, a threat to Caesar and maybe to Herod and whatever other earthly kingdom might be around. And so Luke wants us to know that what we're talking about is a king from the spiritual realm that has brought a spiritual kingdom. And he's not trying to knock Caesar off of his throne in Rome and take over and be a worldly power. You know, that's the very thing. That's one of the things that got Jesus crucified. Some of the accusations that were made is that he was a danger to the government because he was trying to be king and take over. So in the book of Luke and in the book of Acts, that's the reason many Christians were persecuted. When Christians would first come to a town and would preach Jesus Christ and him crucified, then sometimes the reaction would be from the local authoritative powers that represented Rome or one of the or whatever region they were in, and they would want to run the apostles out. And so both in the Gospel of Luke and in the book of Acts, an underlying message is that Jesus is a king, but not that kind of king. And he's got a kingdom, but not that kind of kingdom. So he's not so you don't have to run him out of town. You don't have to crucify him. You don't have to persecute his followers because they're not trying to bring down the local government. So if that's true, and it seems to me a good reading in Luke and Acts, if that's true, then it is useful to have the first story, the first of the two miracles we're going to read today, because it is about a centurion. It's about a kind of a middle ranking, but a middle ranking military person who would be supposed to be acting for the safety and protection of the local government that's in place. And so to have a centurion, and this is not the only centurion story in Scripture, so to have a centurion, someone like that, recognize that Jesus is a help and isn't there to hurt their standing and what they're doing would be a really great thing to include. So the first story that we have today is about this centurion. Also, we want to say that this story takes place in Capernaum. Capernaum becomes the place of activity, the hub of Jesus' activity in the region of Galilee. You know, he's not very welcome in Nazareth, his hometown. He's tried that out. They were going to throw him off a cliff. So he makes Capernaum his seat of operation around Galilee. And in the book of Matthew chapter 9 and verse 1, this is a Matthew observation, but in Matthew chapter 9 and verse one time when Jesus arrives in Capernaum, then the language that Matthew uses is this: he came to his own city. So Capernaum would be like his adopted town. Now this is his own city. But here's another thing about Capernaum. And we're about to read this wonderful miracle of Jesus and his healing of a centurion's servant. We have already had the healing of Peter's mother from a life-threatening fever, which then brought all the neighbors, the citizens of Capernaum, who had sickness and disease, came over to Peter's house to see if Jesus would heal them too, and he did. So Capernaum has seen a good many miracles. We're about to see another in this story, but Matthew chapter 11 and verse 23 has Jesus saying this: "O Capernaum, if the mighty works that have been done in your town had been done in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented and would not have been destroyed. But you, with the mighty works that have been done, have not repented, and your destruction is in the future. So we read these nice stories about Capernaum and the healings that took place there, the disciples that Jesus gathered there. But for the greater part, Capernaum is going to be like so many other cities that reject Jesus. They don't try to throw him off a cliff like Nazareth did, but they do not repent and respond and believe and become disciples as they should have, given the many mighty works that Jesus did in Capernaum. But we start with Luke chapter 7 and verse 1, and this is a mighty work, and it's a very public one, and it involves a lot of people, many of whom then, no doubt, moved to belief in Jesus. So it's the healing of the centurion's servant in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. Here's the reading. After he had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, that's what Barry taught last week. There was a teaching section. He entered Capernaum. Now a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, who was highly valued by him. When the centurion heard about Jesus, he sent to him elders of the Jews, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built for us our synagogue." And Jesus went with them. When he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you, but say the word, and let my servant be healed. For I too am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him, and turning to the crowd that followed him, said, "I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the servant well. So there is this account of the centurion's servant. So it's obvious knowledge from the word centurion that it's got something to do with 100. So in the military structure at the time, a centurion would be a military officer who had 100 people under him, 100 soldiers in his regiment, in his squad. So he was he wasn't a general, but he was a middle-ranking officer with some power, especially assigned to a region, might be the highest-ranking officer in a particular region. It's also believed, it's not said so here, but it's also believed that this particular centurion in the city of Capernaum, given the things that are said about him, is likely not in the service of the Roman army. Caesar had his Roman structure of military, and he did have centurions among them. But also Herod, and the Herod that would have been governing this territory, who did have a Jewish background. He was friendlier to the Romans than he was to many Jews, but at least he had a Jewish background. Herod would have had his own army for policing purposes and for collecting taxes and making sure that in customs that the flow of goods was happening legally. So it's very likely that this centurion was perhaps a Herod regiment instead of a Roman regiment. He would have been, Herod was pretty much a puppet of Caesar, so he still would have been a Roman person, but very likely in Herod's military instead of the larger Roman military. And he does have, this particular centurion, does have some appreciation for the community that he is serving, and therefore he receives that appreciation back. they appreciate him. This is a nice thing to know, that someone who has military, police, authority, sometimes that's not appreciated. Sometimes those people, push their weight around and that sort of thing. But this centurion is doing a above board job, and he takes the tact, the approach of being friendly to his community and enforcing things more through that way than through intimidation. And so, likewise, the Jewish people are responding to him. And there are several things then that we can note and appreciate about him. Remember, as this story is being told, if we're reading between some lines, but it's a pretty good picture to think that this man is non-Jewish. He does live and serve in a Jewish territory. He is a military officer, a centurion, but he is, by all accounts, if you judge by the things that he does, he is a God-fearer. So a Gentile God-fearer living among the Jews. Now, Luke himself, who is by the Spirit writing this account, is also pictured to be in Scripture a Gentile God-fearer living among the Jews. Before he comes to Christ, that would be his background. A little while later in the book of Acts, and Luke writes Luke and Acts. So a little while later in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 10, we meet Cornelius. And Cornelius is a centurion, like this man was. And he also is a God-fearer. He's described in Acts 10 as one who's very devout and who prays to God, and also who gives alms to the people. So again, like this centurion, Cornelius was a centurion who was a blessing to the people that he served. And remember then, with all of these Gentile God-fearers who were coming to know Jesus, Luke is writing to Theophilus, who we would most likely categorize as a Gentile God-fearer that Luke is trying to bring to Jesus by the gospel and through the book of Acts. So all of those things tie together and would help us to know why this would be an important story for Luke to include in the orderly account of the life of Jesus that he is giving. Here's a series of bullet points that would describe this Gentile God-fearer centurion and the appreciation that the community had for him. We do appreciate, first of all, that this man highly valued his servant. Now, sometimes people who are of high rank and are of high status are rather oblivious to the people that are assigned to serve them in their household, and those people might come and go, and they might be seen by some people at least as just laborers that you don't really have any relationship with. They're just there to serve you, and anybody could plug into that. So if that person died or moved on, you just plug in another person. But that's not the case with this centurion. With this centurion, he highly valued this servant of his, and likely would be a Jewish servant, someone from the city of the Jewish territory and town of Capernaum that worked in his household. So he is a person. He's not oblivious. He's not unfeeling. He doesn't consider himself so high and mighty that he can't have a friendly and caring, compassionate relationship with the people who work for him. So he highly valued his servant. We can appreciate that he did that. His community appreciated that. And because of that then, that and other things that we'll mention, he gained the respect and appreciation of the Jewish community. Again, being a military officer in charge of policing, then there might have been local people, Jewish people, who would be resentful of that. And, with him serving Herod, and Herod being a puppet of Rome, that might be something we don't want that in our town. That's forced on us, and so be resentful about it. But these people, this community, doesn't feel that way about him because of the way that he has treated and helped. And one of the things that they tell Jesus is he loved the Jewish nation, which would tell us most likely that he is that God-fearing person, loving the Jewish nation, not just because he happens to be assigned as an officer to live among these people, but he has come to know the Jewish nation as the people of God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob. And he sees them as the light for the nations, for the Gentiles, as God intended for them to be. So he's believing in Jehovah as God, and in the Jewish nation as the people of God. And so he has embraced all of that, and that's what's meant by he loved the Jewish nation. Then another thing is, as these people tell Jesus, and by the way, what happened was, as Jesus came to town, this centurion had this sick servant whom he's concerned about, but rather than approach Jesus himself, there are Jewish representatives, the Jewish elders of the town, go to Jesus to make this request of Jesus on behalf of that man. And no doubt thinking, well, you never know how Jewish-Gentile relationships are going to go. So this man uses the local elders who he knows appreciates them, and they would have the Jewish connection with Jesus. They'll speak for him, and so put in a good word for him. And so these Jewish people are doing that, and they say to Jesus, he built our synagogue, which is a pretty amazing thing to think about. Now, we mentioned earlier, Acts chapter 10, Cornelius and his coming, being a Gentile, God-fearer, centurion, who comes to Jesus at the preaching of Peter, and intervention of the Spirit, and all of those matters. One of the things that was said about Cornelius, we've already said, it was mentioned in Acts 10, early in Acts 10, he was a devout person who prayed to Jehovah. And one of the things that's said about Cornelius was, and he gave alms generously. So here is this centurion in Capernaum, and he also gives alms generously. He gives enough to build a synagogue for the town. But he's a God-fearer, and he loves the Jewish nation. And they need a synagogue, so he builds one. Don Collins, who one of our members here, and one who has traveled a lot in the Near East, and has taught a class here in the auditorium in the past about Bible geography. And one of the slides that Don shows when he does that is the archaeological dig of the synagogue in Capernaum, and there is, as Don tells it, the current synagogue that's there, the building that's there, is built on top of another synagogue that existed sometime in the past. So we may even be able to see that, what this particular centurion did. But he was not just, okay, I'm here in Capernaum, I'm going to try to get along with the citizenry. It's not just that. He embraces them. He loves their nation, he's embraced their God, he gives to them generously and helps them to build their synagogue. And then he also took this good move. He sought the help of Jesus for his servant. It's said in verse 3 of chapter 7, when the centurion heard about Jesus. So he's been hearing Peter's mother-in-law was healed there. Jesus had an all-night healing session at Peter's house. So he has heard about this healer, about this Jesus. And so he initiates going to the Jewish elders and saying, would you go to Jesus? Would you go to this Jesus and ask him if he would help my Jewish servant? Which is, sometimes we can be people of good heart, but we don't take initiative to do good things. So we can appreciate that he took the initiative to make this ask of Jesus. And then, even in making the ask that Jesus would come and help, he expressed humility. There are actually two conversations that take place in this account. First of all, the Jewish elders come to Jesus and say, there's the centurion, he's worthy. That's what they say. He's worthy for you to help him because he's kind and good to us. He is a God-fearer. He loves the Jewish nation. He built for us our synagogue. So he's got this sick servant. So would you come and help? So there's that. But there also is, as Jesus agrees to go to Cornelius' house, while Jesus is on the way to Cornelius' house, Cornelius sends friends. So now we might suppose that these are Gentiles like he. So he sends friends to Jesus, and he says to Jesus, I'm not worthy. The Jewish people said he's worthy. He said, I'm not worthy that you should come into my house. So he is a person who's acting with humility. He sees himself, though he has some rank and status in town, he sees himself as we all should see Jesus, someone before whom we should bow the knee. So he says to Jesus, I'm not worthy that you should come to my house. He expresses that humility. And in doing so, here's likewise a part of that humility. This centurion abided by Jewish Gentile protocols. Even though he lived among the Jews and loved the Jewish nation and built for them their synagogue and can converse with the Jewish elders and ask them to go ask Jesus to help, still within those communities there was a great Jewish-Gentile divide. There was an uncleanness a Jewish person could encounter if they were too close to a Gentile to a Gentile house. You'll remember that in the book of Acts chapter 10, the Spirit has to send three. It's the same vision, but he sends it three times. He sends three visions to Peter about clean and unclean, with God saying, what I've made clean, don't you call unclean. Peter's initial response to being told by God to go to Cornelius' house, his initial response is, oh, no, Lord, I've never been in a Gentile's house. That would render me unclean. I don't do unclean things. So God is saying, well, what I've called clean, don't you call unclean. But that was the protocol of the day. Even though he loved the Jewish nation in that way, and his community loved him, and he loved the community, still he was, I think here, acting really protectively of Jesus. People would not respond well, you being a Jew, if you actually came in my house. So for your own protection of reputation, then you don't actually have to come under my roof. But he says, but I do understand this, because being in the military and an officer, I have people above me who tell me what to do, and I have to do it. And I have soldiers under me, and when I tell them to do something, they have to do it. Go and dig that hole, and then fill it back up. Well, they have to do it. So he says to Jesus, I'm aware that you work in a different sphere than I do. You work in the sphere of the spiritual and of the diseased, but and I work in the military field, but even so, I understand how authority works, and I believe that you do have this authority in your own sphere, and so you don't have to come under my roof to heal the servant. All you have to do is give the order. Just give the order. And so Jesus responds to that by saying, I haven't found faith like that in all Israel. Here's a Gentile, God-fearer though he may be. Here's a Gentile who understands, who's gaining some understanding of who I am and what authority I have, and therefore where I've come from and what I'm here to do. And I haven't found a response like that among the people who have the prophets and the scriptures and should be anticipating and ready to receive my authority and that I've come from heaven. It's taken me a while to convince the Jewish people of that, but here's a Gentile who already gets all of that. So Jesus does speak the word, and when the friends get back home, then the servant is healed. So this is an account where Jesus is identified as who he is. God is glorified through what Jesus does, and the kingdom of Jesus. We're calling this book Devoted to the King and the Kingdom. Jesus as King does this kingdom work. His kingdom work is proclaim good news to the poor, release those who are captive, bring freedom to the imprisoned, proclaim the year of God's favor. That's the kingdom and the king. And Jesus carries that work out here. Then there's a second miracle that follows that one up. This one still in Galilee, but in a different town. This one takes place in a town called Nain. Verse 11 of Luke 7. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. Luke's always mentioning the size of the crowd because it's showing, first of all, that there are a great many witnesses to these things that happen. As Paul would say later about the things Jesus did. They didn't happen in a corner. Jesus did these things publicly. Many eyes were on Jesus and saw him, and besides that, were responding well to Jesus. So in verse 12, as Jesus drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. So a great crowd is following Jesus. There's a considerable crowd that has shown up for this funeral procession, taking the body of this one who had died out of the gates, getting the unclean out of the city. So going outside the gates for the burial. But the body is being carried on. The word that my Bible uses is the bier. So the stretcher or coffin-like stretcher that would be used to carry this body out. And so Jesus is coming into the town. These people are coming out of the town in order to take this body to burial. And when Jesus saw her, he had compassion on her and said, "Do not weep." Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him spread through the whole of Judea and all around the surrounding country. So here is Jesus entering this town. Did Jesus just happen to arrive at the funeral time, or is this a providential thing that this is taking place that gives Jesus immediate introduction to the town of Nain? But in any case, the funeral is taking place. Jesus sees the grieving community, and among them, the woman who is grieving the death of her only son. And this sparks compassion in Jesus. Not only is this her only son, but she is already a widow. The Bible has a phrase for the women whose husbands have died and whose male children have died, and they're spoken of as a widow indeed, because she's left without any sort of male support and therefore financial support and the way that they worked things. So she would be a widow indeed, left without husband, left without child. So here she was in great sadness, and Jesus heals then. Doesn't help. He goes to the dead one. He touches the bier, the coffin, which that would be one of those unclean things. If you were to touch a dead body, you remember the Nazirite vow. Nazirites couldn't be around anything dead. If you happened to touch something that was dead, or even if you even walked across a grave, then that would render you unclean in the Jewish tradition of things. But Jesus, in his case, doesn't become unclean by contact with the unclean, but he, in his cleanness, makes the unclean clean. And so he touches the bier, and he says to the dead person, you wouldn't think you could hear, but Jesus says, "Rise up." And again, remember what the centurion servant said about Jesus, "At your word, just speak the word, just give the order." So Jesus here gave an order, "Sit up." And the one who was dead, and the whole town knew he was dead. They were in his funeral procession. He had pallbearers. He had a grieving mother. But Jesus, on this account, raises the dead and returns this one to his mother. Jesus raises a few dead people and does many miracles, and raising the dead was among them. The compassion of Jesus is mentioned here. You know, in the book of James, which would be spirit written by Jesus' brother, James was Jesus' brother, that true religion has to do with care for the widows and the orphans. So Jesus is especially touched by this woman's predicament. And so he gives back to her her son, who had been taken from her because of death. Satan operates with the tool of death. Jesus has come so that we might have life and have it more abundantly. I use a word in our book here that foreshadowing his intentions in the spirit of the eschatological promise to dry away all tears, Jesus told the mother not to weep. I decided to throw that big theological word in there, eschatological. Eschatology has to do with end times. The book of Revelation, chapter 21:4, is talking about what's going to happen one day when Jesus comes again, when a new age is ushered in. And here's the description of that age. And this will be full and complete in the age that's to come, in the return of Jesus Christ. Here's how it will be. Revelation 21 and verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain. All of those things were present in this story. There was death, there was mourning, there was crying, there was the pain of loss, there were tears. But Jesus took all of that away. And that's a foreshadowing. Jesus hasn't taken away, as of yet, all of our tears, all of our pain, all of our suffering. But one day, all of those things will come to an end. And we see in this story that he has the power to do it. And one day, it will be done. And so then, with that, a report, again, goes out about Jesus. People are coming to know who Jesus is. They're able to identify him because of these miracles and because of the other things that he's done as the anointed, the Christ, who has come to bring God's favor into the world, and we should listen, obey, follow, and be his disciples.